Hello everyone, good morning and welcome to the MarkMonitor webinar on understanding the essentials in managing your domain portfolio. My name is Prudence Malinki and I am your host for today. There will be a Q&A session at the end of this presentation and I hope you find it useful. So today we shall be discussing essentials in portfolio management, and that will involve going through basically all of the basics. Those of you that were able to attend the domain event in London this year will know that one of the big recurring themes for 2016 in our department is getting back to basics, really stripping down our sector of jargon and trying to really remove the use of overly technical language to demystify portfolio management and make it easy and accessible for everyone. So in today's session, we'll be going over the basics. We'll be talking about registrations and transfers. We'll be talking about the portal and the best way to use the portal. We'll also be focusing really primarily on the common pitfalls in portfolio management. So we'll be talking about what type of things what we see here as CSMs or client service managers with regards to reporting and documents. Also things such as WHOIS and registrations. We'll also be looking at the typical common mistakes that we see with regards to renewals and deletions, as well as security processes and transfers. And then what we'll do is we will wrap up our session today with discussions of best practice. So we'll just do a quick recap and summarise all of the major points of today's session and go through essentially the best things that you need to do and the little tips and tricks that we would suggest that you take on. So we hope that it's going to be really informative. And then we'll end our session today with a Q&A session where you can ask me anything and you can ask any questions relating to portfolio management. Okay, let's get started. So with regards to the essentials in portfolio management, whenever you undertake registrations or transfers, we've noticed that there were a number of actions that really should be undertaken before any instructions are sent to your CSM or before you even look at your portal and touch any buttons. There are certainly some internal processes that you could really benefit from using before you actually undertake any action. So before you register any domain name or before you submit any transfer of a domain name, do ensure that you consult the wider business and make sure that all of the relevant stakeholders, this can include legal, marketing, even technical teams, are consulted to make sure that you are acting in the best interests of the business and that the registrations that you are undertaking are with actual approvals and consent. This is to ensure that you are minimising any scope, that you are acting outside of business interests, or that you are potentially causing any issues within the business by your actions. In addition to making sure that you've consulted all of the relevant stakeholders, before you decide to register a domain name, it's always best to make sure that you are making an informed decision. That means that you have all of the information at your arsenal before you decide to take any action. So this involves knowing the requirements. Before you register a domain name, are you aware of what actions need to be undertaken in order to secure the domain? Are you eligible for the domain? Also, does the extension even exist? So doing your prior research on the requirements is one element. In addition to the requirements, availability is another aspect that's really, really pertinent. Now, this is something that you can undertake yourself. Our portal has an integrated WHOIS lookup, so whenever you place the registration request, we will check the availability for you in real time during your request. However, if it's for a confidential launch or a specific project, you can always check the WHOIS availability by asking your account manager or by using the portal to do WHOIS lookups. Now, it's always best to have this information beforehand, because there's nothing worse than the disappointment of requesting a registration and that domain name being registered already by a third party. So in addition to doing your research on the requirements and checking your eligibility and the availability, always making sure that you have the correct registrant and DNS or name server profiles in the portal. Not just being sure of what you want to register, if that registration is available and what the requirements are, but also what is the legal entity that needs to own that domain name. Making sure that domain names are registered to the correct legal owners is a very important aspect of what is part of a registration process. This is to ensure that in future, domain names are held by the correct entities and that there are no future ownership change projects that need to be taken, which could be costly and timely for more complex extensions. Another element as well is that of technical configuration. Now that we've established who should own the domain, if you are eligible for the domain, and if the domain name is available, in addition to this, you need to have a look at how should this domain be configured. One of the main pitfalls that we'll be discussing a little later today is that of having active use of your own domains. It's a very important factor of portfolio management. How should this domain name resolve? Is there a website that's intended for this domain? Should it just be redirecting to another different website? Is it primarily used for email? Or is there just a holding page that you're using for now? But either way, knowing the technical configuration, knowing whether the name servers, if it's to be on MarkMonitor name servers or if it's to go on to a third-party name servers, these are all very important things to know in advance of actually placing the request. So before you contact your CSM, before you go into the portal and enter any registration requests or transfer requests, it's always best to know how you intend to use this domain and what the technical setup should be. So if you are intending to have the domain on MarkMonitor name servers, as you know, all MarkMonitor standard DNS is either URL redirecting or is a primary zone. So if you know that your domain is going to be a primary zone, what records are required in that zone? So these are the types of things you really do need to be aware of and to think about before you place the request, to make sure that the registration or the transfer goes as smoothly and as simply as possible. Okay, so Essentials in Portfolio Management also talks about communication. So communication is a pivotal and key aspect of what we do here at MarkMonitor. So your CSM or myself will be at the centre of what we do here. And the types of communications that you will usually send across to us are your standard things such as registrations and transfers. So these are your day-to-day tasks. Please register this.com or please transfer in this domain. But in addition to registrations and transfers, we need to be notified of additional information that's happening with your business. Now, this is to ensure that we can provide the most efficient and effective service to you and to help you avoid costly and potentially difficult projects in the future. So the types of things that you should be communicating to your CSM in a timely manner are things such as updates to your company address. So having an account with your MarkMonitor organisation and with your CSM, you will have a default registrant profile. This is the typical registration detail that all of your domains will be registered or transferred to. If at any point you become aware that there are any changes to these default details, and this could be something as small as a slight number change on the street number, or even something small like you've just changed city, but the rest of the organisation details are the same. We should be notified of this at the earliest instance. This is to make sure that if we potentially spot that an update project is required, where we'll need to update all of your details, we can keep you informed and let you know of any potential documents that you'll need to make sure that your WHOIS information is kept up to date. As a domain name registrant or as a domain name owner, you have an obligation to ensure that your WHOIS details are kept up to date and correct at all times. So when you have updates to your company address, do ensure that you notify your CSM at the earliest instance. This involves also as well and should include any changes to company name. So the legal registrant of a domain name is the legal owner of the domain name that will be displayed on public WHOIS databases. If there are changes to the name of that legal entity, that should be communicated to your CSM also to ensure that ownership change projects can be undertaken. There's nothing worse than a few years down the line realising that half of your portfolio is owned to an entity that doesn't exist, or if there is a divestiture in the business, that your portfolio is now held by an entity that is actually owned by another entity, which again looks pretty bad. So we need to avoid these types of things by communicating these types of updates to your CSM in a timely and an efficient way. Now, in addition to company names and company address details, also your contacts or your day-to-day contacts need to be updated too. So if you are changing role and you're no longer going to be responsible for the upkeep of the portfolio, or you're no longer going to be the day-to-day contact to do with your portfolio, you should communicate this with your CSM at the earliest instance. Now, this is to ensure that we can identify new primary users, and also as well, this is to make sure that we have sufficient users that are listed in the system that can then supplementary take your role on, or that can then work as the new day-to-day contact moving forward. There are lots of technical things that need to happen with regard to security to ensure that when new users try to access the system, that they're set up and that they have the correct access levels and authorizations and are permitted to use the system. And in order to do that, we need communication from you. So you'll notice, being a MarkMonitor client, that when your CSM goes on holiday, you receive multiple notifications to do with this. So these notifications will usually involve an initial notification of being away from the office, be it on annual leave or any type of reason. In addition to that, you'll find that there will be a secondary notification, and that will involve the provision of an actual point of contact that can then be used in their absence. Now, the same courtesy needs to be extended from your side as a client. So one thing we noticed here at MarkMonitor is that when our primary contact is away or goes on holiday, there is no notification of who is authorised to make communications or correspondence in their absence. And one thing that actually does happen more often than should is that of unauthorised users who are contacting us or CSMs or MarkMonitor in the absence of the primary user who is out of office or away from the office for any reason. And what will happen is typically an email will be sent or a call will be made by this unauthorised user, and we have to provide the unfortunate news that we can't action the request until an authorised user has approved it, which is part of our security protocol. And what this can mean is that we're in a bind where we're unable to provide the support that you need. So this can be easily avoided by just very quickly sending an email, notifying us that you will be away from office, how long you'll be away for, and then providing us with the contact information of the authorised users that will be in contact with us during the time that you are away. So this type of notification will allow us to make sure that all of the relevant processes are followed to make sure that those users are deemed as authorised users, so everything can be smooth and everything can run smoothly whilst you're away. So in addition to communication being a very vital part of what we do here at MarkMonitor, another essential in portfolio management that sometimes gets overlooked is that of the portal itself. Now, the portal is a vital tool in the management of your portfolio, but what you may not realise is that there is a whole host of additional things that you can have from the portal that you may find useful. One thing I wanted to highlight in our session today is that of training. So at MarkMonitor, we offer free portal training, demos and webinars for new users and existing users. Now, this training can be actually tailored to your needs. So to provide an example, if you have a new technical contact who is being exposed to the portal for the first time, we can then organise free on-site or via webinar portal training from a technical perspective. And this is to allow the new user to be completely familiar and comfortable with using hosted services and all of the different facilities that are listed in hosted services. So this will ensure that when the user accesses hosted services for the first time themselves personally, that they are completely conversant, completely confident, and able to navigate through hosted services with ease. Now, this type of training is available to all levels of user, so this is not just technical users. The day-to-day contacts, if we have new contacts that need to use the portal, we can provide free training for them as well to ensure that they become very familiar with how to place a registration or how to place a transfer, and that becomes a straightforward process for them. So, in addition to training, another important essential part of portfolio management is that of reviewing users and reviewing their access levels. So, as part of the security protocol here at MarkMonitor, anyone who is listed as a user on the account or on your account has the ability to contact MarkMonitor and have their requests actioned. So because of this ability, it's quite important to ensure that all of the relevant portal users are actually listed against your account, but also if there is anyone who leaves, that they are removed from the account. Because all it takes is one disgruntled employee to make one change that can lead to a lot of disruption with regards to website functionality or with regards to the portfolio stability. So also looking at things such as what access levels are required for relevant users. So at MarkMonitor, we have tiered levels of access. So you can tailor the user's ability to access and use the portal at any time. So you should always review what levels of access your existing users have to see whether you need to add further restrictions or add less restrictions and provide more control and more flexibility. Another vital, essential part of portfolio management is that of technical users and security. So this is another security measure. So your average user may not have access to hosted services. However, it's always worth being mindful that those that do have access to hosted services are able to actually be reviewed and that the correct parties are accessing the correct parts of the portal. The reason why this is quite a separate and quite a relevant part is the hosted service platform is pretty much where all of your zone files and secure data for MarkMonitor hosted domains are retained. So if you have any party that should not be able to make zone file changes or that should not be able to see any zone files at all, it's really important that you restrict their access so they only have access to what they need rather than access a blanket access to everything. Okay, let's move on to our next subject. Let's move on to pitfalls and common mistakes. So here we'll be running through all of the typical things that we see here that can actually lead to issues and problems, and we'll run through, or I will run through all of the typical mistakes or typical common mistakes that we see here and the best way to avoid these types of actions. So starting off with reports and documents. So the typical pitfall that we see here, or the typical common error we see primarily, is what I like to call non-report use. So this essentially is where people don't use reports at all, and this is where you're not requesting reports where you have the ability to request reports that could be really, really helpful. So let's give the hypothetical scenario of a product launch or a brand launch. If you need to know the availability of a specific brand term in advance of a launch, you can request a global availability report, or if you know the specific regions that your launch should take place in, you can request a report for specific geographical areas to your CSM. Now, this report will give you a really good view on whether a domain or a brand is in use, where it's in use, and also who it's in use by. It never fails to surprise me about how many times a domain appears registered by a third party, but then upon further inspection, it's actually owned by a satellite office, or it's an overzealous person in marketing that's decided to jump the gun and place a registration off their own volition. But again, you should be utilising the reports that we can provide. A lot of these reports are free of charge. And again, if you need further information as to what types of reports we can supply here at MarkMonitor, reach out to your CSM and we'll be able to provide you with some further information. The next pitfall that we see with regards to reporting or the provision of documents is that of poorly timed report requests. So to provide you with a bit of visibility or a bit of transparency, a complex report, that is, for example, a report that encompasses a large number of extensions with full WHOIS information where available, this can actually take a number of weeks to compile all of that data. So when a request is made for a report and the turnaround time is that of 2 days, unfortunately we're not going to be able to compile that information in that time frame. So make sure that if you are going to request a very complex or very large report, or a very important or pivotal report, make sure that that report is requested with sufficient time. Or if you're not sure as to how long it will take to compile the report, ask your CSM, how long will this report take roughly? And they should be able to give you an estimation as to how long, whether it will be a number of weeks, or whether it can be a number of days, or whether it may be up to a month, depending on the complexity. But sending a request for a report that's quite complex and providing a turnaround time of less than a week may lead to disappointment. So another thing that we've noted as well is that of incorrect report requests. So sometimes if you know that you only need a report that covers Asia region, asking for a global availability report that encompasses the entire planet may not be the best use of resources, especially when if you ask for a report that's smaller, that covers a smaller sector, you may receive it faster than getting a report that encompasses a lot of data that you may not need. Also, things such as if you don't need full WHOIS information and that you're happy just to see a registrant name if the domain is taken in your report, do say so. The more that you can simplify the report and the more that you can be specific in your report, the better it will be with regards to getting the information that is relevant to you. The reason why, I'll come to this shortly, is if you request a report and that report actually is incorrect for your need, it leads you to have an amass of data that you cannot use. And I'll talk about this a little bit more shortly. The next action point or pitfall that I want to discuss is that of a delay in processing report data. So going back to the scenario of your brand launch and your global availability report that you've excitedly received, with the available extensions, the ever-changing nature of the WHOIS database means that you need to ensure that when you are receiving this information, that this information is subject to change. And the longer you take in processing that report data and actually providing an action or an instruction, such as a registration or a transfer, the more likely that there may have been changes to the whois and someone else may have registered the domain. So the best way to action this, or the best way to process the data, is to work alongside your CSM to identify any immediate actions that you need to take and any ones that can then subsequently be delayed. The longer you leave to process a report and the longer you leave to provide instructions related to a report, the more likely it is that you may encounter difficulties with domains being registered by third parties or domain names no longer being available and actually being taken. So in addition to delays in processing your report data, with reporting and documents, one thing that happens a lot, a very common pitfall, is that of failure in utilising the report data. And now what this is a euphemism for is an inability to process the data that's been received. So let's go back to our example of that global availability reports that you've received. Global availability reports contain a lot of information, and sometimes it's very understandable when you've got that level of information, especially if it may not actually be needed. It can feel like an information sensory overload, and there's a lot of stuff to process. So what we like to do here is, or what we like to suggest here, is that you lean on your CSM, lean on your client service manager to review and work with you to go through the data. Because sometimes that level of data can be quite intimidating. But when you work through it with your CSM, they can help you navigate through the information to see what parts are relevant to you, what parts are not relevant to you, and to help you focus on where you need to be kind of averting your eyes and where you need to be concentrating your attention. And this will ensure that when you use your report, when you get your report, that it's actually being used in the most effective or efficient way. So work with your CSM to go through reporting data, and that should be a definite way to make sure that you're actually utilising your reports in the best way. Or if you don't necessarily need to lean heavily on your CSM, do not be afraid to just ask questions and query the data itself. If there's any column of information that's not necessarily making sense to you, just reach out and ask, and again, we can elaborate or provide further clarity for you. So let's carry on and move on to our next area of common mistakes, and that is that of whois and registrations. So when you are looking to register a domain name, one of the biggest mistakes that we see is that of there being an initial rush to secure a domain name and needing to secure it, so it's urgent, it needs to be done now, and so any registrant details become used or become viable registrant details. So rushing to register a domain name, leading to issues further down the line where ownership of the domain name becomes problematic. So what we like to suggest here is, even though something is urgent, always make sure that you get the registrant details correct the first time round. And this is where your research becomes key and pivotal. So if you need to have domain names registered to a specific entity, and if for whatever reason that entity is not eligible, so say for example your entity is based in the United States and the registration requires it to be based in Europe, you need to have a secondary entity that can be used, and that needs to be one that's approved, and that needs to be one that is correct rather than one that is just sufficient. And this is to ensure that down the line, if the wider business looks at the portfolio, that they don't feel a need to then have subsequent ownership changes, or there are questions being raised as to whether the correct details were used and why the details have been used as well. So in addition to using incorrect registrant details for domain names, Another common issue that we see, or common mistake, is that of failure to update WHOIS information. So this tends to happen all of the time and for a myriad of reasons, but things such as office relocations, changes to named contacts, and also things such as changes to primary email addresses as well. These are all things that happen in the day-to-day existence of business, or the day-to-day, existence of business management. So when these things take place, it's really important to ensure that we're notified and that the portfolio is updated in a timely manner. The reason being is that what we tend to see is that 2 or 3 years down the line after the project has taken place, or the address has moved, a new contact will look and notice that pretty much 75% of the portfolio is owned to incorrect entities and is listing incorrect details. And then a project needs to be undertaken, which is costly and again requires the provision of documents and isn't very timely either. So all of this can be avoided if contemporaneously we deal with things such as office relocations and changes to named contacts, and also email changes. And it harks back to the communication point in our earlier slide as well. Communication really is key to a successful portfolio management. Okay, so not just looking at the failure to update WHOIS information being a common mistake with WHOIS and registrations, using personal names or personal email addresses on domain names is another really common mistake that we see all of the time. So, with generic extensions, or with any extension that does not mandatorily require the use of an individual name, where a role such as domain manager or domain administrator is allowed, we should really endeavour to shy away from using a person's contact name. The use of personal details should be really avoided at all costs, unless it is a mandatory requirement from a registry. Now, this can really cause issues where individuals become associated with domain names and that individual leaves the business, or that individual becomes a direct employee of a competitor, and then it looks incredibly bad to have their name on there. And worse than having their name listed on there, sometimes with an email address as well, important correspondence from the registry can sometimes be sent to registrant email addresses. So if it's a personal email address that's being used, then that means that if that email, for whatever reason, becomes defunct because that person has left the organisation, then it becomes problematic for us to retrieve correspondence or to make sure that we're managing the domain name efficiently for you. So, where you can, do avoid using personal names or personal email addresses. Try and keep it generic, and try and keep it standardised as well. So, in addition to using personal details and failure to update WHOIS details, another thing that we've noted as well is that of registrations to incorrect extensions. So, when you look to register domain names, you should look to register on a broad scale. So look at regions, but then look at future regions. So you have your immediate set of extensions, obviously your .com, .co.uk, .net, and sometimes parts of Europe. But think to 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, look to the goals and objectives of the wider business, and then look at all of the regions that you may need to incorporate, such as Asia, North America, and other parts of the globe. There are also specific extensions that may not be of use to you from an actual trade perspective, but from a defensive perspective are crucial to ensure that you register them to defensively make sure that any third party doesn't. Now, if you need support with identifying these extensions that should be a part of the mandatory process, reach out to your CSM. This is what we're here for. We can support you in creating this list of extensions that you know that you can always register and secure immediately, but making sure that you are registering wider and encompassing more is something that we would strongly suggest, because thinking in a narrow context of registering just the .com is not necessarily the best way to launch an important brand or to secure an important new business venture. Okay, so after looking at whois and registrations, the other pitfall area that I'd like to discuss is that of deletions and renewals. So this is where it becomes a bit more to do with process. So the types of things that we see here are requests to transfer a domain name too close to the domain expiry date. So just to reiterate, and I'm sure you're all very aware, domain names can only be transferred when they are active, live, or, as I like to say, healthy. So any domain name that is too close to its expiry date, it's too risky to transfer that domain name because it could lapse during the transfer process. So with extensions that have more than 5 to 7 working days to transfer, if you are, or to renew, or well, to do the transfer process, but the renewal date of the domain is, say, 7 days or 8 days, that is too close to the transfer. So you'll need to make sure that the domain is renewed first, and then you can do the transfer afterwards. But always check the renewal dates of your domains before you request the transfer, and this is to avoid your CSM having to contact you and say, I'm sorry, you might need to renew this domain name before we can transfer it for you. So the converse, or the other side of that coin, is where we receive deletion requests too close to the renewal date. So the other side of the coin is that of auto-renew. So domain names that are set to auto-renew, there is an automated renewal process that happens in the background. Now, in order to stop that process, you have to request your deletion with sufficient time. Now, this may actually come as quite a bit of surprise, but it's more than 14 days. So if you are requesting a deletion, say for example of a GTLD, it has to be within the 33 days of the actual expiration date. And with a CCTLD, it's 45 days, because any closer to the actual expiration date, the renewal process will actually start, and we won't be able to delete it in time. So to avoid disappointment, make sure that you're submitting your do not renew or deletion requests with sufficient time. And if at any point you're not sure what those timeframes are, just ask, and we can provide that information for you. And again, it's the same thing with regards to renewals and deletions. So again, if you imagine a three-sided coin, so if you've got requesting deletions too close to the renewal date being one issue, then requesting renewals too close to a deletion date is the other issue. So this is one we see all of the time, and this is where we actually see domain names that are in pending delete, which means we cannot do anything with them. They're literally just about to be released into the wild and to be able to be registered again by other people. We receive a request to renew. And there's nothing more heartbreaking than saying, I'm really sorry, but we can't. So it's always best to check the stage of the renewal before you actually request the actual renewal itself. So check how expired the domain name is before you request to renew, to avoid being disappointed, because with deletion processes, there becomes a stage in the deletion process where there is no renewal instruction that can be processed. What I would actually like to strongly suggest at all is that please do not allow your domain names to lapse and then subsequently try and renew them. It's very risky. Just ensure that your domains are set to auto renew to avoid this type of scenario completely. speaking of placing domains in auto-renew and then taking them out of auto-renew, the next point that I wanted to raise is another common pitfall, and that is placing domains in manual renew. I know a lot of clients like to be hands-on with their portfolio and they like to control what they do, but one thing we notice here a lot at MarkMonitor is when someone will place a domain into manual renew, and what this means is when you switch off auto-renew, completely switch it off, and put a domain into manual renew. No, and if you can notice the tone of fear in my voice, that is genuine fear. And what this actually translates in the real world is that MarkMonitor as a business has no obligation to renew a domain name for you unless you specifically go into the portal and you request the renewal. Now, what this means and what this actually tends to translate to in real life or the real world is that domain names end up being deleted because someone has forgotten to renew their domain and they presume that we're going to renew it for them, and we can't because the domain name is a manual renewal and our automated systems won't pick up the instruction. You have to physically go in and submit the renewal yourself. And one thing we always suggest is we will let you do that, but you have to be able to take on that responsibility, and sometimes that can be a lot of responsibility. And leading to our final point, which is that of deleting retrieved and valuable domain names. So accidentally deleting domains because they contain a hyphen happens. So we have people that strictly follow processes and internal domain policies without actually doing due diligence. Due diligence is such an important part of portfolio management. Before you delete a domain name, make sure that you have consulted all of the wider business. Make sure that you've done all of your research, and that research can be things such as traffic statistics. If the domain name is on MarkMonitor DNS, you can see the footfall traffic or have a rough estimation of how many queries that domain name receives, and that should give you an indication as to whether you should keep it or whether you should delete it. You'll be surprised at how much sometimes a domain name that looks really innocuous and actually looks like it can be deleted can generate a lot of traffic and actually should be kept purely for the traffic diversion. And also as well, deleting domain names that you've retrieved in UDRP or that you've retrieved in domain disputes. When you allow these domains to be deleted, essentially you are allowing another cyber squatter to register them. So just be aware that you are essentially creating a circular pattern of behaviour by deleting domains that you've retrieved in UDRP or court action cases. Okay, so let's move on to our next level of pitfall, and that is to do with centralisation projects. What I mean by a centralisation project is a mass transfer migration project, or just your day-to-day transfers. Now, these are pretty common things that you'd expect, and these are things such as using different providers to manage your domain portfolio. And the reason why this comes up is because, and the reason why you'll tend to hear us say it time and time again, is because it's an inefficient way to manage your portfolio. You're using multiple databases, you're using multiple portals, and it's hard to keep on top of which domains are where, especially if you have a large portfolio. Also as well, different providers have different nuances and different ways. So some are more self-serving, some provide different service levels, and some have different processes for renewals and deletions. So having to put the onus on you, because that's essentially where it is, on being able to manage all of these different providers, manage all of the different domain names, and make sure that you're not letting any potential ball drop, that's a huge task. It's much more easy, efficient, and more beneficial for you to utilise one provider for your entire portfolio. So another thing that we tend to see as well with regards to centralisation or big transfer projects is not appointing the correct stakeholders. Now what this means is where if we have a big transfer project, you've got 300 domains, you've just acquired a new business, everyone's excited, it's good times for everyone, and you need to migrate 300 domains into your portfolio, we will need various stakeholders that can assist with this from your business, from your side. This includes a technical stakeholder, someone that can verify zone file information if the domains are to come on to our DNS. So the failure to identify someone who can do this type of information means that we can have undue delay or things can become a little bit more protracted, and a project that can be done in 3 months becomes a project that ends up being done in 7 months. And this can all be avoided if we just appoint all of the relevant stakeholders before we start the project. Everyone knows their responsibilities and their roles, and then we can start the project and move very quickly through all of the work that needs to be done. Also, with regards to centralisation projects, another thing we tend to note is that of billing and invoicing. So where we find that incorrect billing or incorrect invoicing situations arise, this tends to happen where we're not provided with different billing contacts or the correct billing contacts before we start the project. If you know that this new 300 domains need to be invoiced to a new entity, we need to have the information of that new entity to set up a correct invoicing account for them. And again, this all comes down to communication. But again, this is a very common pitfall that happens in transferring large volumes of domains. Also as well, if, say, from the 300, there's different groups that need to be set up for invoicing, this is something that you need to work with your CSM to make sure that those groups are set up before you start your centralisation project. Another thing, or the final thing, that I want to talk about with regards to centralisation projects is that of the lack of involvement in the transfer process. Now, what this means is sometimes, not always, but sometimes, we find that our clients will take a hands-off approach with a migration project. So this is where we are the gaining registrar, so you are moving domains to us. However, there is a losing registrar that is moving the domains into our system. So sometimes what we find is where our point of contact in your organisation is somewhat reluctant to get involved in what can sometimes seem like a melee between the losing registrar and the gaining registrar. Sometimes what we need is just a little bit of a push from the losing registrar to kind of get them ignited to provide information. And sometimes the best way to get that little push is for you to step in and just send a very nicely worded email or just give a quick call to the losing registrar just to remind them that they kind of need to do things. And sometimes that can be a big difference, or can lead to a huge difference with regards to the provision of auth codes and having things provided in a timely and efficient manner. Okay, so moving on to our next level of mistakes, or our final one for today, and that is of security. Now, security is one of the biggest elements in what we do here. We live in a society where registries get hacked, domain names get hacked. We call people pirates and cyber squatters, and these threats are still alive in 2016, and as alive in 2016 as they were in 2010. So what we've noted here at MarkMonitor is this frightening and slightly alarming trend of not using facilities that are available to you for your primary or most valuable domains. And this is like not using our locking facilities. So we have 2 tiers of locking facilities to further enhance security of your primary domains. We can lock domains at registry level, involving protocols to ensure that you can only unlock domains if specific protocols and processes are being followed by authorized persons. This level of security is available and should be utilised for your most valuable domains that are in your portfolio. Now, without going into too much detail about all of the facilities here, if you need further information, do reach out to your CSM, but this is one of the biggest pitfalls we find, where someone hasn't used a locking mechanism and that something's happened to the domain, and this all can be avoided. The next thing that we tend to find with regards to security is not reviewing your portal user list or people who have access to the portal. And I've mentioned this a little bit before, but this is a common theme where unauthorized persons access the portal, make changes, and all of this can be avoided if you just review who has access, what level of access, and where necessary, ask them to stop or remove. And it's the same with the levels of access that needs to be reviewed as well. Another thing I want to raise here is IP range restrictions and making sure that if you want to make sure that your users only access the portal from within a specific IP address range, we can do that. And the final thing is that of not setting up two-factor or not utilising the most efficient two-factor authentication method. So there are different ways you can use two-factor. You can have a token, you can use an app on your smartphone, or you can use an SMS to your phone. Sometimes you can change the method that works for you. So if you need to change your method, just reach out to your CSM and we can do that for you. Okay, so from all of the pitfalls and common mistakes, let's have a look at the best practice that you can do. And this is just a recap as to the high-level points that we have that you can do. So with domains that are your primary sites, your main sites, look to using our premium lock or super locking services. Also, look and review the extensions that you want to register when you're doing new launches, and work with your CSM to establish a standard list of extensions that you can use with registrations. Communication. Talk to your CSM. Let us know when you're going on holiday. Let us know who your second and third in command are. Let us set up rights and permissions for all of the relevant users, so when you go away, there are no issues and everything can carry on as normal. Also as well, consider sending us registry communications. So if you're receiving stuff from the registry, forward it to your CSM. Also, forward us copies of any of the spam emails that you're receiving from other providers or from people that are appearing to be the registry, because that helps us keep up to date with changes in the sector. Also, review your portfolio policy and make sure that your portfolio review policy is communicated internally. Look at your strategies for your deletion of domains and your registrations, and again, make sure that those strategies are communicated internally and externally. And have a periodical content review. Are your domain names resolving? It's pivotal that your domain names are all being used in the best way possible. We provide up-down reports, and they will actually just say whether a website is up or whether a website is down. And also do your periodical review of portal users and the levels of access that they have. And that will be concluding our session for today. Thank you very much for your time. And the only thing that leaves me to say is that with 2 minutes, are there any questions? No? Okay. You've been a quiet crowd. Again, I hope you've really enjoyed today's session. If I am your direct CSM, do not hesitate to give me a call. Again, my name is Prudence Malinki. Again, CSM at MarkMonitor. Have a lovely day today, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks, everyone.